This is day 22 of Advent of Cyber 2023. This challenge is called Jingle Your SSRF Bells, a Merry Command and Control Hackventure. As the elves try to recover the compromised servers, McSkitty's SOC team identify abnormal activity and notice that a massive amount of data is being sent to an unknown server, which was identified on day 9. An insider has likely created a malicious backdoor. McSkitty has contacted Detective Frosto from law enforcement to help them. Can you assist Detective Frosto in taking down the command and control server? So the learning objectives: understanding server-side request forgery, which types of SSRF are used to exploit the vulnerability, prerequisites for exploiting the vulnerability, how the attack works, how to exploit the vulnerability, and mitigation measures for protection. So SSRF is server-side request forgery. It's a security vulnerability that occurs when an attacker tricks a web application into making unauthorized requests to internal or external resources on the server's behalf. This can allow an attacker to interact with internal systems, potentially leading to exposure or unauthorized actions. Leaving web applications vulnerable to SSRF can have profound security implications, potentially leading to unauthorized access to internal systems, remote code execution, data breaches, or the application being further compromised. There's basic SSRF, which the attacker sends a crafted request from the vulnerable server to internal or external resources. So for example, they might attempt to access files on the local file system, internal services, or database that are not intended to be publicly accessible. Blind SSRF. In a blind SSRF attack, the attacker doesn't directly see the response of the request. Instead, they may infer information about the internal network by measuring the time it takes for the server to respond or observing error message changes. Semi-blind. The attacker does not receive direct responses in the browser application. However, they rely on indirect clues, side channel information, or observable effects within the application to determine the success or failure of their SSRF requests. This may involve monitoring changes in application behavior, response times, error messages, and other signs. So the prerequisites for exploitation: vulnerable endpoint points. Web applications must have input fields susceptible to manipulation, such as URLs or file upload functionalities, and lack of input validation. The application should have adequate input validation or effective sanitization mechanisms, allowing an attacker to craft malicious requests. So how does SSRF work? So identifying vulnerable input. The attacker locates an input field within the application that can be manipulated to trigger server-side requests. This could be a URL parameter in a web form, an API endpoint, or request parameter inputs such as referrer. Manipulating the input. The attacker inputs a malicious URL or other payloads that cause the application to make unintended requests. This input could be a URL pointing to an internal server, a loopback address, or an internal server under the attacker's control. Requesting unauthorized resources. The application server, unaware of the malicious input, makes a request to the specified URL or resource. This request could target internal resources, sensitive services, or external services. Exploiting the response. Depending on the application's behavior and the attacker's payload, the response from the malicious request may provide valuable information, such as internal server data, credentials, system credentials information, or pathways for further exploitation. So, using SSRF to hack the command and control server. Disclaimer: hacking a command and control server is ethically unacceptable and illegal. Any suspected C2 activity should be reported to the appropriate incident response team for investigation and mitigation. This knowledge is provided solely for educational purposes. Detective Frosto checked the C2 against known vulnerabilities, but none worked. He decided to give SSRF a shot. Now that we know how SSRF works, can you help Detective Frosto take down the C2 server? So for this challenge, we need to turn on the challenge virtual machine, and then we need to turn on the attack box. Okay, so we've now got both of those set up, so let's get started. So we can access the C2 server by going to the URL there, which is mcgreedysecretc2.thm. So in the attack box, we can copy that URL, open up our web browser, and then in the web browser we can go to that URL, like so. Apparently we can't access it like that. We need to add the host name to the OS attack box. I assume you can just, instead of putting that to the host file like it's saying, we can just put it into the URL like this. Yep, we can. So let's carry on. So identify a vulnerable input. Once we visit the URL for the command and control server, we'll see that it's protected by a login panel. McSkitty's pen tester team have launched different types of automated and manual scans to gain access, but all in vain. For a target to be exploitable through SSRF, we need to use some vulnerable input to forge the request to the server. Sometimes these requests can be found through scanning, viewing source code, or other documentation logs. So manipulating the input. McSkitty noticed a link to the documentation at the bottom of the page. Once we click on the URL, it redirects us to the endpoints API. Now that we have some URLs, we can try SSRF attacks against them. So accessing through API, That opens the document here. So requesting the unauthorized resource. We can see that one of the endpoints, this, takes the URL as a parameter. If an infected agent URL is provided to it, it will fetch all files from the infected agent. But what if we change the URL parameter to a different IP and try to access any other file? Exploiting the response. We notice that if we change the URL parameter to any other file on the host, we can still fetch the file like so. So if we grabbed that and did this, we can see the index.php file, which appears to be to the login form right here. As you can see, they're accessing through APIs there. So the file scheme, when using the URL, typically references local files on a computer or file system. For example, file like that is often used to access a file located on your local file system. Usually an attacker can access sensitive files like etc password and connection strings like this to take the control of the C2 panel. So we can get the C2 panel's credentials by accessing the file containing the password. Then we can log in successfully to the C2 panel. So if we're looking at this here, it's got include config.php. So it seems like it might be getting the username and password from there. So go to config.php, and there it is. So username and password. And we are now in on the dashboard. Okay, so mitigation measures. To prevent SSRF exploitation, the following mitigations are suggested. Employing strict input validation and sanitization to prevent malicious input, using allow lists to control which domains and IPs the application can access, applying network segmentation to restrict requests to authorized resources, and following the principle of least privilege, granting the minimum permissions required for system operations. So, is SSRF the process in which the attacker tricks the server into loading only external resources? Nay, because it will also be local resources. What is the C2 version? 1.1 in the bottom right there. What is the username for accessing the panel? It is McGrady. What is the flag? It is up here in the top. THM exploited 31001. What is the flag value after stopping the data exfiltration from McGiddy's computer? Okay, so what does that mean? So I assume it means this, remove. Okay, so now I've got, it's the same flag as before, but now it's just 1001, so remove the 3. Okay, maybe that's not it. Oh, agent removed. Agent removed. There we go. And that is day 22 of Advent of Cyber 2023 completed. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you can watch me complete the rest of these challenges.